and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Jason Karp of HumanCo. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure for being here.
Yeah, so to kick things off, I'd like to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
I grew up in a small town in northwestern Connecticut, a small town called Avon that is near Hartford, Connecticut. It was I'd call it a pretty vanilla middle class upbringing.
Mm,
We lived in a small neighborhood that was closer to a farm than it was to the city.
mm,
We didn't really have uh, kind of entrepreneurs or very successful business people. The successful people where I grew up were doctors and lawyers.
yeah,
Um, and it was uh, I'd say it was an interesting time relative to today, where I'm 47 years old now. Um, Back then in the 80s, we obviously didn't have cell phones or the internet, or even computers for that matter.
yeah,
Uh, and so we spent all of our time, playing around, getting in trouble, being bored,
mm,
um, constantly looking for things to do. And my father was a retail stockbroker for Merrill Lynch.
mm,
Always, always made me really intrigued by business. Um, and he was also someone that loved games,
yeah,
games of chance. He loved poker. He loved gin. He loved all card games. And that uh, combination of, I'd say, him and my own disposition and some of my hooligan friends that I had in my neighborhood that always liked getting into trouble taught me a profound acceptance of risk.
mm, yeah,
So I always was okay with taking risk.
love it. So growing up, what were some of your aspirations then? I mean, kind of talking about your father, did you follow those footsteps going into college? What did you pursue then?
Yeah, it was a weird story. I actually was pre med.
Mm,
I went to University of Pennsylvania at a college, at a high school, pre med. I always wanted to be a doctor,
mm,
but I always was entrepreneurial, and I always, loved business. And there were a few elements of luck that happened to me in my freshman year, where I was a competitive tennis player growing up.
mm,
Um, should have played at Penn, and I actually switched from tennis to squash when I got there, and basically took up a totally new sport in college, which in hindsight looks insane,
yeah,
given the time commitment. But because of that, and a class that I had to take because of my athletic schedule, which was Econ 101, I discovered that I had a real um, knack for finance and business.
mm,
And uh, Penn happened to have the best business school in the country called Wharton.
yep,
And after my first semester and the results of how I did my first semester, my father and I kind of decided maybe I should transfer into Wharton and pursue business.
mm.
And that's kind of how that happened in terms of my switch from pre med to business.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a huge change just after one semester. Getting into then Wharton Business School, what were those aspirations? I know you mentioned finance, but kind of what were you gearing towards post graduation then getting into?
I didn't fully know. I always was very mathematical, and I loved math and probabilities and numbers, and I always had a math oriented mind.
Mm,
I also always liked speculation, and I had done some investing in college, and was always interested in the way other businesses worked. But I didn't quite know exactly what I wanted to do. And in that time period, which was 1990, I graduated in 1998.
Mhm.
But investment banking was the hot job.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to go to an investment bank that now no longer exists, which was at the time uh, the the kind of hottest place to go working out of my school. It
Mm.
was a firm called DLJ, and I got a really lucky break um, where one of the trustees of the university had one of the oldest hedge funds,
Mm.
and he, through a variety of channels, basically recruited me to come work for him instead of me going to the investment bank.
Mm.
I didn't know anything about hedge funds.
Yeah.
In 1998, nobody knew anything about hedge funds.
Yeah.
There were only a handful of them back then. And it was what appealed to me versus banking was it was a lot more entrepreneurial within the
Mm.
finance realm.
Yeah.
It was uh, much more loose in terms of what you could do and what you couldn't do. And I had done an internship at DLJ the summer before where they basically make you just do Excel and pitch books for, 15 hours a day.
Yep.
And I kind of knew that that wasn't for me. So for a few reasons, I ended up taking this hedge fund job straight out of college when I was 21.
Mm.
And that really kind of then dictated the course of my life thereafter.
Yeah. I mean, how long did you hold that job then? Did you I know you went and got your MBA after that. Was that correct?
No, I didn't.
No, you didn't. Okay.
Yeah, most people who go to Wharton undergrad end up not getting their MBA
Interesting.
because it's a full business school undergraduate program.
Yeah.
And when you're a junior and you're senior, you end up taking a bunch of the classes with the MBAs.
Yeah.
And so, most people there's a few people who go back after having their Wharton undergrad. It's generally more for those three letters or
Yeah.
for the networking.
Yeah.
Um, but I felt like I learned whatever I would learn in business school, graduate school,
For sure.
and I just wanted to get going.
Yeah. So what was that experience like then working in that hedge fund and kind of how long was that time period then and any big milestones that you could account for at that young age?
Yeah, I mean, I stayed in the hedge fund business for almost 21 years.
Wow.
So um, I did it from the age of 21 until 42,
Mm.
which was 5 years ago when I officially retired.
Yeah.
Um, I think there were some really important elements of that chapter for me. That first job, I was there for 7 years, and um, it was also in my second and third year of working there. I had this really interesting dichotomy happen,
Mm.
which was I was far more successful than I had ever imagined in the job, but I also got very, very sick.
Mm.
And that was when I was 23. I started developing my various diseases, which is also when I started going blind.
Mm.
And I developed a degenerative eye disease uh, for which there's no cure. And the various ophthalmologists that I saw told me I would be fully blind by the age of 30.
Mm. Wow.
And that was a dark time for me
Mm.
because, on the one hand, I sort of felt like, all I ever wanted to do was be successful in business and make a bunch of money. And I thought that money would solve my problems and would make me
Mm.
happy. And, I
Yeah.
grew up in a culture where people were worshiping people like Gordon Gekko and, all of these, and Warren Buffett and all these business titans. And
Yep.
here I was kind of achieving everything I hoped
Mm.
very early. And I was very sick.
Mm.
And you realize quickly that when you're really sick, nothing else matters but your health.
Yeah.
And there's no amount of money in the world that can cure certain diseases.
Mm.
And so it doesn't matter how successful or rich you are. If you're not well, you have nothing.
Yeah.
And I was pretty desperate. I was depressed. At the time. I thought, many doctors basically said I was dying and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And I decided to take matters into my own hands and see if I could cure myself with methods that were not conventional Western medicine.
Mm.
And I started going down all of these alternative medicine pathways that some people now call functional medicine, where you
Yeah.
address the root causes of diseases instead of the symptoms of the disease.
Mm.
And I studied indigenous peoples, I studied ancestral diets, I studied anti inflammatory diets, I studied why do certain people live very long, and also why are Americans so sick?
Mm.
And I developed a naive hypothesis that was based on ancestral eating, and believe that a lot of the reason we're all so sick today as humans is because we live in a way that's inconsistent with how we evolved.
Yeah.
And I realized I was, drinking too much caffeine, drinking a lot of alcohol at night, the whole work hard, play hard thing. I
Mhm.
was eating a fair amount of shit, um, processed food, junk food, lots of gluten, and decided to go on a very restricted diet
Mm.
and kind of change my lifestyle and see if it would affect my diseases. And the
Yeah.
doctors all thought it wouldn't do anything. They thought it was just like naive optimism that wouldn't lead anywhere. And after a couple months, my vision started coming back,
Wow.
and my other diseases started to reverse,
Mm.
and they couldn't believe it. And thankfully, there's an objective measure for my eye disease where it doesn't matter if I say I can see or not. There's actually a test they can do
Yeah.
that says if you have the disease or not. And I went in with what felt like perfect vision. And I said to the doctor, I said, I don't think the disease is there anymore. And he said, that's impossible. It's a degenerative disease. There's no cure for it. And I said, give
Mm.
me the test. He gave me the test and the disease was gone.
Wow.
And I was the first case they'd ever seen of someone reversing this disease. If you Google my eye disease today, it still says it's incurable. And
Wow.
I am a living miracle
Yeah.
of showing that you can do things that most Western doctors think are impossible.
Mm.
And that was what began my trajectory towards health and wellness,
Mm.
and my obsession with helping wake up humans on how toxic our food system is and how sick we all are and how sick we're becoming. And that's
Mm.
ultimately what led to the genesis of the creation of Kitchen and Hugh Chocolate.
Yeah. Wow, incredible. So what was that encounter like? I mean, with the doctor then? I mean, if it's still showing up as an incurable disease and your test comes back proven gone, what was that encounter like there?
He called over one of his colleagues when the results came back, and he goes to his colleague. He says, "You got to come see this." And his colleague looking, and I could hear them whispering because
Mm.
they didn't want me hearing. And they're whispering, "I think I misdiagnosed him. Like this is impossible."
Mm.
And I'm in the chair, and I can kind of hear him. And then he comes over and he goes, "What did you do?" And I told him, and he goes, "Nah," like that, like just like this
Wow.
condescending, obnoxious,
Hmm.
closed-minded. And then he said, "We must have misdiagnosed you. You probably didn't have the disease after all."
Wow.
And and it was clear I had it for 6 months. It's like a black and white disease,
Yeah.
you know, and and you could see it in the eyeball. It's not like something that's like subjective.
Yeah.
It's like me diagnosing you as only having one arm,
Yeah.
and then you grow your arm back.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
so it was a really really stark revelation for me
Mm.
about how um, dogmatic and closed-minded
Yeah.
modern science is. I think there is a lack of acknowledgement amongst very scientific uh, doctors
Hmm.
that there are things we can't explain, and there's a lot of things we can't explain,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of things we still don't know how it works. And as an example, the placebo effect is incorporated into every single drug trial.
Mm.
When they are trying to approve a new drug, a new medicine, every single drug trial includes the placebo effect,
Mm.
which we don't understand how the placebo effect actually works.
Yeah.
We just know it works. We know that when people put their mind to something, they can actually change their physiology.
Yep.
And that in and of itself is an acknowledgement that we have no
Mm.
idea how things work.
Yeah.
And, for whatever reason, some people believe God healed me. Some people believe that I was able to heal myself through my own manifestation.
Hmm.
Some people believe that the removing of all the poisons allowed my body to heal itself for something that no one's ever seen healed before.
Mm.
But that put me on a trajectory where I have met countless people
Mm.
who've had freakish, flukish diseases that they have cured in ways that are not typical medicine.
Yeah.
I've met people who have had cancer that they've cured
Mm.
without chemotherapy.
Wow.
There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of this. This is not like there's five people,
Yeah.
and this is the basis for functional medicine. This is the basis for all these different alternative healing methods.
Mm.
And if you go to other cultures that have a respect for spirituality, India and Asia,
Yep.
they have loads of alternative healing methods that are not pharmaceuticals
Yeah.
that work. And I
Yep.
think American doctors are just so arrogant that thinking that pure materialistic science can solve everything.
Yeah.
That part of the reason we're here today with everyone so sick is because we're thinking you could just take a pill
Hmm.
and you could cure things. And that's
Yep.
not always the case.
No, that's an interesting point. So a guest I've had on before, Naveen Jain, he's all about holistic health as well. And there's a short reel that he even mentions. It's kind of around your last point, where in in medicine today, scientific medicine, by the time we're 60, we're gonna be popping more pills than blueberries. And he said that line, and it's so true because if you're not thinking about preventative care along the way or holistic health, but if you just take that advice and just keep popping pills because of the economic value for the doctors, you're gonna be popping more pills than blueberries. And he said it so clear.
He's right. I mean, we
Yeah.
spend more money per person on healthcare today than we do on food
Yeah.
per person.
Yep.
And America is so disproportionately sick relative to all the other developed countries, in terms of how much we spend on healthcare relative to what our health outcomes are.
Mm.
We spend more than a factor of two on healthcare than the second country, and we are 79th
Mm.
in health outcomes. Of
Yeah.
There's 78 countries that are
Mm.
healthier than us and spend far, far less on it.
It's
This
crazy.
year, and it's recurring, but Spain was voted healthiest country in the world. Um, the Spanish are far less wealthy than we are.
Yeah.
They exercise far less than we do. They smoke cigarettes all the time. They eat bread and carbs and dairy every meal.
Yeah.
Um, but they enjoy their life. They spend time with other people. They take siestas and naps regularly.
Hmm.
Their food is generally less processed, far fewer chemicals, much more organic, much more like actual, like from the earth, unprocessed kind of food.
Yeah.
Um, and they have much better work life balance.
Yep.
And, most of Europe, I hear sometimes in finance and, the tech entrepreneurial world, they make fun of Europe for their unemployment. They make fun of it for their lack of work ethic. They
Mm,
make fun of it for not being as successful or rich as we are. And you have to ask the question, what are we optimizing for? They're
mm,
happier, they live longer, they enjoy their life way more than we do, and they're much less sick than we are.
yeah.
So it's like, who's winning? Are we winning or are they winning?
Mm,
They're winning.
yeah. It's interesting. So at this turn, after I mean your own experience here, then you mentioned that this is when Hugh comes and HuKitchen. But why get into chocolate? I'm curious the start with chocolate and the products that you did start with.
The chocolate was an accident.
Mm,
So Hugh Kitchen, first off, Hugh stands for human.
yep.
A lot of people call it Who, um, despite our best efforts to get you to pronounce it Hugh.
Yeah.
Hugh stands for human. Our slogan is Get Back to Human, which is based on my own journey that I went through,
Mm,
which is I believe that if we get back to a way of living more human, we will all heal each other.
yep.
And that's not just food. That's some of the other things I mentioned about Spain. That's community, that's
Mm,
movement, that's laughter, that's spirituality, that's not being isolated, that's lack of sedentary behavior. There's a whole, if you've heard of the blue zones, there's a big truth to why those blue zones have the largest population of centenarians of all countries.
mm,
Um, Hugh started with my wife and my brother-in-law, her brother.
mhm,
Um, he, I'd say about 7, 8 years after I cured myself, he started reading a lot of the same books and resources that I had read.
mm,
Uh, and he and I would talk about and geek out over kind of what would be now called early biohacking.
yeah.
And he noticed how much better he looked, how much better he felt, how much better he performed, how much better he slept. And he said to me, why don't we create a restaurant that's the manifestation of all these principles? Because there's nowhere to eat like this in New York City.
Mm,
And wouldn't it be amazing if you could go into a place that was gluten free and dairy free and refined sugar free and no seed oils and everything was wild and everything was organic and
mm,
it could be like an oasis? Because
yeah.
at that point I had a very restrictive diet. It was hard for me to trust, who made this, where's it from, what kind of adulterants are in this.
Mm,
And I said to him, I was running my own hedge fund at the time. And I said to him, I said, dude, it's a great idea, but restaurants are terrible businesses. We don't
mm,
know anything about restaurants.
yeah.
And I'm a professional investor, and I can tell you like 99% of those go out of business.
Yeah.
And to his credit, he convinced me uh, to do it. He said he would quit his job. My wife would go full time with him on it. I would be the capital and the chairman
Mm,
because I had a day job.
yeah.
We would come up with everything ourselves, and we would hire. We were I think humble enough to know what we didn't know,
Yeah.
and we knew nothing, to be
Mhm.
clear, about running a restaurant. And we hired a bunch of consultants who helped us to tell us what landmines there were, what not to do, people in branding, people in marketing, people in operations.
Mm,
And right before we opened, so HuKitchen, which was in kind of the Union Square area of New York City,
yep.
was kind of like an ancestral or paleo food court. It was not a sit down restaurant with servers.
Got it.
We had different stations, and we had like a juice and tonic bar that had organic coffee and matcha. And then we had my favorite section was our bakery. And our
Mm,
bakery was gluten and grain free baked goods,
wow.
cookies, muffins, things like banana bread. And I love baked goods, but I'm pretty strictly gluten free. And
Yeah.
we also wanted to be grain free. And we wanted some of these goods that we were making to have chocolate chips in them. And we could not find chocolate chips that would sell to us that didn't have chemicals in it,
Mm,
preservatives in it, dairy, refined sugar. Um, and we realized we had to make our own chocolate chips for our bakery section.
Wow.
And we ended up finding this chocolatier who makes like custom chocolate for people. We told him what our ingredient specs were. He thought we were insane. Um, but we said, look, we want to see if you can make it this way, which was just organic cacao and organic unrefined coconut sugar.
Yeah.
And he had never worked with coconut sugar before. It's much harder to make chocolate the way we do than the conventional way, which uses refined, highly refined white cane sugar.
Yeah.
And after a lot of trial and error, he hit a recipe that we said, this is amazing. These are going to be our chocolate chips. And my brother-in-law said, this is so good, we should turn them into chocolate bars and sell them in our restaurant.
Mm.
And we were basically hand making them, and people were coming in and buying them like 5 at a time,
Wow.
like pretty quickly. And we knew we had something unique here. And then we had a really lucky break where one of our chefs,
Mm.
his girlfriend worked at Whole Foods,
Mm.
and he used to bring her home our chocolate. And one
Wow.
day she came in and basically said, this is the best healthy chocolate I've ever had. Can we sell it at the Columbus Circle location at Whole Foods? And we said, sure. And that's how we got into the CPG business.
Wow. That's
That
an
was
incredible story.
2013 that we started selling into Whole Foods.
Wow. So just from that one location then, so you started selling to Whole Foods. At what point did it expand? I mean, and what was her position to get it in Whole Foods as well? I'm curious.
Well, back then, Whole Foods was not owned by Amazon yet.
Yep.
And they had something back then called local foragers. And the local foragers were people that worked at the Whole Foods that could bring in local goods
Mm.
that were only for that store.
Got it.
And they didn't need to be like regulated or like compliant with national products.
Yep.
So our stuff originally didn't have like a nutrition facts label on it. It didn't have like testing.
Mm.
It was just like a homemade chocolate.
Yeah.
And it was just in that one store. And we kind of knew with the initial success of that one store that we had like a real thing here. And
Yeah.
so at that moment in time, we decided, and we had no outside investors at this point, we decided to separate the businesses into Hugh Chocolate and Hugh Restaurant,
Mm.
or what we called Hugh Products, because
Yep.
eventually it became snacks,
Yep.
like chocolate covered nuts, which we sell, called the hunks, and chocolate chips and the chocolate bars, and um, and my brother-in-law basically went full time. We hired a manager for the restaurant. My brother-in-law went full time on building out the chocolate business.
Mm.
And it was a lot of boots on the ground in the early days, going to a lot of like mom and pops, a lot of bodegas, a lot of little stores that were kind of high end and gourmet kind of places.
Mhm.
And all we did was he'd go in, literally like a traveling salesman. He'd bring like a suitcase, and he would just say, "Try our chocolate."
Mm.
And when people would look at the label, a lot of people in the early days would be like, "There's no way this is going to be good,"
Yeah.
because it has on the front of the package, it has all the no's. It says no gluten, no dairy, no refined sugar, no soy, etc. And so people were thinking like, "Oh, this is a healthy chocolate. It's going to be gross."
Mm.
And we would just basically have them taste it, and they'd be like, "Okay, I'll take it."
Yeah.
And it just kind of it went like this. And we had a few really lucky breaks along the way where we had a bunch of celebrities who loved coming into our restaurant because of our authentic values.
Mhm.
We were doing no seed oils in 2012.
Yeah.
Like we were way ahead, to the point where people thought we were insane. And but we had some celebrities who had like a big mouthpiece who loved what we were doing. They would come in, and this is like early days of social media, early days of Instagram. And occasionally we'd have some people post and say, like, I love HuKitchen. I love Hugh Chocolate. Have you ever heard of this?
Mm.
And it started becoming viral. And we didn't have like a budget. This was a family business. We didn't have outside investors. We weren't like a venture funded company.
Yeah.
So we had no interest in like growing super fast and losing a lot of money. It was, I didn't want to lose money. So we were very slow and deliberate with how we grew.
Yeah.
And, our demand outstripped our supply
Mm.
for years. Like we couldn't make enough.
Yeah, at what point did you switch to, like, a co-man then? Where you guys were
Oh,
still
pretty
making it.
quickly. No, we had several co-mans along the way,
Got it, that makes sense.
and
Okay.
we just kept outgrowing the co-mans.
Wow.
And we couldn't do the traditional co-man thing because the way in which we made our chocolate was different from
Mm.
traditional chocolate.
Yeah.
So in our first few co-mans, we had to retrofit their current facility with some of our own machinery that we had to buy and
Mm.
put it on their floor so that we could make it the way we make it.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. So, at what point then did Hugh then scale outside of New York? What was that biggest opportunity? Was that the spread of Whole Foods, or what was that leading cause,
Yeah.
would you say?
Whole Foods was kind of our first and biggest, like, and then we also got into Erewhon back before Erewhon was really well known.
Yeah.
And like, just in the kind of, in the fanatical circles of health and wellness people who like really care about ingredients and really care about fair trade and where things are sourced from and how you treat people.
Mm.
Like there just weren't, we were very early. There weren't many companies that were really better for you.
Yeah.
There were some better for you companies, but like you could tell they still weren't like good. They were
Yeah.
just like slightly better, and we had a set of standards that were that were really kind of dangerous from a business perspective in terms of how strict we were. A
Mm.
lot of people thought I was insane. And they're just like, what you're doing can never make money. Like
Mm.
you can't charge $10 for a chocolate bar.
Yeah.
And by the way, when we were charging $10 for our chocolate bars in the very early days, we were making like no money because it
Yeah.
costs us like $8 to make a chocolate bar. And
Wow.
and and we ended up bucking that trend probably out of naivete.
Mm.
If I knew then what I know now, I never would have done it.
Yeah.
Um, but there were a lot of people that said, you know what, like, I don't want to eat candy. This isn't candy. Dark chocolate, if it's done right, is actually a health food.
Yep.
And here's another interesting lesson for you, Cameron.
Yeah.
Like, business schools and case studies and all this, like, when people are writing, pitches,
Mhm.
um, they tell you to look at the total addressable market,
Yep.
what they call the TAM. And you're always supposed to look at the TAM. And I've seen businesses that get people really excited because the TAM is $100 billion, and they say if we could just capture 2% of the TAM, we're going to do 2 billion a year kind of stuff.
Yep.
That's always misleading. But the other side of it is also grossly misleading, which was when we first started talking to outside investors, and they would like have their own data and they go, the chocolate market is depending on how you look at it, a 10 to $25 billion a year business for
Mm.
the world.
Yep.
But the healthy chocolate market
Mm.
was like $50 million when we were doing our stuff.
Yep.
And they'd say the TAM of what you're doing is only $50 million. Like, what are you going to capture? 20% of it? And you're going to be
Mm.
10 million? Like, who cares?
Yeah.
And what we said was, we're going to create the market.
Mm.
Like, what we were observing was that most of our Hugh Chocolate customers were not eating chocolate.
Mm,
Like the super majority of the people who were eating Hugh chocolate were
yeah.
people who ate zero chocolate. And so the whole TAM argument was garbage.
Yeah.
Hugh Chocolate does multiples now of what that TAM was,
For
just as
sure.
a single company.
For sure.
And so like it was misleading because, and this also, there's many great case studies of other companies that did this. Like a lot of people who missed early Uber,
Yeah.
would be like, what, how much of the taxi cab market are you going to take? And that was the wrong way to look at
Yeah.
right? It was all the people that weren't taking taxis.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
And so it's important to remember that sometimes you can make the market,
Mm,
and that's not always the right way to look at it.
yeah. So, I mean, I could stay on this topic for a while, but to get into Human Co here soon, at the point of acquisition, then it's kind of a nice segue from the investor talk. But at the peak of COVID, like you guys are right at the peak of COVID, and the acquisition happens. What was that time period like? What was the scaling and the team? What was that like at acquisition point?
Yeah, it was a crazy period, and I there's certain things I can say, and I'm limited to what I can say that's public information,
For sure.
because Hugh is now owned by a public company.
Yep.
But um, we hired a new CEO, to really kind of help us take it to the next level in 2019.
Hmm.
Um, and we had taken on Mondelez, which is the company that owns Cadbury and Oreos and Toblerone, and it's the largest snacking company in the world.
Yep.
We had taken them on as a minority small investor, to help us grow
Mm,
and to help us understand international markets. And they're the best in the business. Um, and they started moving more into healthier snacks. They had recently bought Tate's Cookies, they had bought Perfect Bar,
mm,
and they were showing that they were really intentional about getting into healthier snacking.
yep.
And so we wanted them as a partner. And early in 2020, another company had made an unsolicited bid for Hugh.
Mm,
And we ended up having a competitive process. The company was not for sale at the time. We weren't, we had not hired bankers. We weren't trying to sell it. We
yeah.
wanted to grow it, another 5, 6 years before we even contemplated that. And importantly, it was still our family business. It was our baby. My
Mm,
wife and her brother are faces on all the packaging,
mm,
literally. So it's
yeah.
very much like our baby and our family business, and we put our blood, sweat, and tears into it. But at that point, we had outside investors. It was a minority of the business. My family was still the super majority of the business.
Hmm.
But as a fiduciary, when you get a price that is wildly compelling, you have to take it, or
Yeah.
else you're not being a fiduciary to your investors. And so it was a very bittersweet moment. Um,
Mm,
but we ended up selling the company in
mm.
two parts. Part of it was in 2021, and the other part of it was in 2023.
Okay. Wow. So that segue there, with all of your experience in scaling Hue, and kind of your own health experience as well, Human Co. Evolving into that, it's kind of getting back into your investor roots, but focused on your health experience, also Hue's experience. Can you kind of tell the listeners what Human Co. is now today?
Yeah. So we actually started HumanCo uh, kind of in 2019. So
Mm,
it was a couple years before Hugh started,
mhm.
before Hugh sold. But
Yep.
at that point, eh, Hugh had become a real business that was very clearly focused on chocolate. And I, as a health conscious consumer and as an activist and as an investor, I really wished there were more brands and experiences
Mm.
that were very strict in terms of their health attributes and in
Yep.
terms of what they allow and what they don't allow and what they promote. And having been an investor in the space, I had seen that there were a lot of companies that started off what I'll call pretty clean in terms
Mm.
of which ingredients they allow and what practices they use and what they don't. And then because of outside investors and because of market forces, they need to improve their margin, they need to improve
Mm.
their shelf stability, they need to make money faster, their venture capital firm isn't happy with them.
Yeah.
They all downgrade their ingredients.
Yep.
And they go from, you know, using organic coconut sugar to using refined white cane sugar. They go
Mm.
from much smaller, much bigger in size to much smaller in size, or they go from
Mm.
organic to not organic, or they go from no seed oils to seed oils, and
Yeah.
it's it's all because of business and profits. And when I would ask these entrepreneurs, like, why did you do that?
Mm.
And they'd say, I didn't want to, but my investor made me. I was running out of money. Our business wasn't viable. Consumers wouldn't pay me what I needed to make.
Mm.
And it's like sad
Yeah.
that the reason these small companies that are doing it the right way, they don't make it
Mm.
because they can't charge what they need to charge.
Mm.
And the consumer thinks when they see a high price for a really intentional, mission driven product, the consumer thinks they're getting ripped off.
Yep.
They don't really know that that company's probably not even making a good margin on it. It just actually costs a lot more if you want to treat the animals humanely and you want to use regenerative farming and you don't want to have slave labor and you
Mm.
don't want to use Monsanto and genetically modified shit.
Yeah.
Like, it costs more to not
Mm.
poison us.
Mm. Yeah.
And that is a travesty. And so I said, I want to take the same approach we did with you and apply it to other brands and experiences
Mm.
where we can buy and build brands in other categories that are not chocolate,
Yep.
where we can show people that you can do it right.
Mm.
And it's amazing and delicious, but it's not in the chocolate category.
Yep.
And so HumanCo you could think of as like a mini conglomerate of brands and experiences where we're trying to build an ecosystem where everything under the HumanCo umbrella you can trust.
Mm.
You can know that I'm crazy and I made a decision to do whatever we're doing. And if I'm putting my name on it, I have done a lot of homework to tell you it is okay.
Yeah.
And we have what we call HumanCo brands,
Mhm.
where we fully control. It's really three food brands: Cosmic Bliss, which is an organic ice cream company. We have a plant-based line, and we have a grass-fed, grass-finished dairy line.
Mhm.
That's gotten a lot of press recently
Mm.
because we did a really innovative partnership with Hailey Bieber,
Yep.
where we took her iconic Erewhon smoothie and turned it into an ice cream.
Mm.
Um, and we are now the number one selling ice cream in Sprouts.
Wow.
And we also have an organic plant-based soft serve with clean ingredients that you can find at Erewhon in LA.
Mm.
Most soft serve is filled with garbage. It's certainly not organic. We use a
Yeah.
regenerative sweetener in there. Um, so like a real, really unique product. Um, we have a gluten and grain free bread and pizza company called Against the Grain.
Mm.
Against the Grain is the number one performing gluten free pizza in the country.
Wow.
It's been around for 15 years. We have no seed oils in that. Super clean, simple ingredient label. None of the weird shit that you see in like frozen pizzas.
Yeah.
And then we have a gluten and grain free pizza bite
Mm.
called Snow Days.
Mm.
That was a attempt to go after Totinos, which are literally made from nuclear waste There,
Mm.
if you look at the Totino's ingredient label on like the pepperoni SKU, which is their best selling product, it has over 90
Mm.
ingredients in it. It
Wow.
doesn't even have real cheese in it. It actually says imitation cheese.
Wow.
It is an abomination.
Wow.
And I used to love pizza bites growing up, and I wanted to have something that you could feed your kids and
Yep.
not be worried about. And then we have, so that's HumanCo brands. And then we have HumanCo investments. And
Mm.
HumanCo investments are where we don't fully control or own 100% of the business.
Mhm.
Um, we sort of control now the largest health and wellness full service restaurant group called True Food Kitchen.
Mhm.
Um, we don't own 100% of it, but it is the healthiest full service restaurant. There's 45 True Foods across the country. We're
Mm.
the only sit down restaurant that has no seed oils. We're incredibly responsible to what farms we work with. It's kind of a, if you haven't been, it's kind of like a farm to table experience, but very approachable. It's not super expensive. Families can
Yep.
go there. And we just launched, this is like my favorite thing. And
Yep.
this was also our one of our top sellers at HuKitchen. We just launched an air fried, gluten free, no seed oil chicken tender.
Mm.
And it's amazing.
Sounds good.
And if you compare it to all the fast food joints that have chicken tenders, like a Chick-fil-A or a, or a Raising Cane's, like it's so much healthier and it's amazing.
Mm.
Um, and then we have an organic baby food company that we invested in pretty recently called Amara,
Mm.
AMARA.
Yep.
And we're the number one in a kind of a niche category for kids and toddlers called smoothie melts.
Mm.
Um, they're these basically little discs that melt in your mouth. And there's a handful of these products that you'll find in most baby food aisles. And the first ingredient in them is sugar. In
Mm.
ours, there's no added sugar. It's all basically fruit puree.
Mm.
So it's a terrific product. And our biggest customer there is Costco, but we can sell direct to consumer online. You could just Google it. And if you have kids, it's amazing and worth trying.
Wow. Now I love how all the brands at the core revolve around kind of your previous mission with Hugh. But to the listeners out there, Human Co investments and then Human Co brands, what does that look like in Human Co brands? Being more into the ownership level, what does that involvement look like from your team with those
Well,
brands then?
we run the companies. I mean,
Yeah.
the difference between HumanCo brands and HumanCo investments is in HumanCo investments, there's like a whole team that we have bet on as investors. We're on the board of these companies and we help direct where they go, but like they run.
Yeah.
The HumanCo brands businesses, we run them. We're in charge of the operations, we're in charge of the quality control, we're in
Mm.
charge of the product development. So we have a team that works on the HumanCo brand side
Yep.
that is in charge of everything.
So in Human Co brands, do all these brands share like a co-manufacturer? Like, or are they
They
all
don't.
diverse where they started or where
No,
they came
what
into
we
the
do
brand?
we do have what we call shared resources across different functions.
Yeah.
So our marketing and our sales team, um, our finance people, CFO, controller types, those are all shared.
Yep.
We have some functions that are not shared. Obviously making ice cream and dealing with ice cream is very different than making pizza.
Yeah.
So where we make our ice cream is a different facility than where we make our pizza.
Yep. I see. Looking into the future, how do you see kind of the industry of holistic foods playing into, uh, like we mentioned, that TAM? I know you can create your own TAM and industry or sector, but how do you see that expanding?
I mean, you'll probably notice in the news in the last few months that um, there's a lot of companies that are being lab tested where
Hmm.
you'll see a report that'll say like Bonza has the highest glyphosate levels of any product ever tested.
Yeah.
And Bonds is supposed to be a better for you pasta. But what I think the public discovered is that chickpeas in this country, when they're not organic, are generally filled with pesticides.
Mm.
And then you'll see reports that certain things have heavy metals, or you'll see reports that certain things are, you thought were healthy, but are really not. Like there was this whole movement with these sugar-free gummies
Mm.
where they were using sugar alcohols, and people were obsessed with these gummies. And a lot of people were eating them thinking it wouldn't spike their blood sugar. But then
Mm.
people who were diabetic or people who were wearing continuous glucose monitors noticed that when they ate these healthy gummies, they were getting the same spike as if they were
Mm.
getting if they ate, movie theater gummies.
Yeah.
And so I think the consumer is starting to get more wise that better for you still isn't what it's cracked up to be.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot more focus now on organic, and there's a lot more focus on lab testing
Mm.
and like how it's made and where it's made and who's behind this. A lot of the better for you companies that kind of came out in the last 5 years were run by people who really don't give a shit about you as the consumer.
Yeah.
They just viewed it as a way to make money. And so I think it's important for your listeners, if they care about it, to just do a little homework on who's behind it
Mm.
and like, why did they do it?
Yeah.
Because some of the best companies were started by people who were sick,
Mm.
or it was a mom who wanted to feed her child a healthy food. And those companies might be smaller. They may not have the capital that the big companies do, but there is like a soul
Mm.
and an intention behind why it was done.
Yep.
And I feel like there is an energetic quality that goes into the food
Mm.
when you have people behind it who really care
Yeah.
versus people behind it who are just trying to get rich.
Yep.
And I think, like, look, when we created Hugh, we weren't trying to make money. It just happened. I mean, obviously, I didn't want to lose money, but
Yeah.
like, I didn't think it was going to turn into what it turned into. Like, we were doing it first for our family, and we were doing it for humanity.
Yep.
And I feel like that is really important. And I think it's so important also for consumers when they find products that they love and
Mhm.
they like how whoever's making it is making it, whether it's from a farmer or from an entrepreneur, pay up for it.
Mm.
Like, don't be cheap
Yep.
because those companies rarely make it.
Mm.
And I promise you, none of these companies that are charging a lot of money for like better products are making a healthy margin yet.
Yeah.
None of them, because it's so much harder to do it
Mm.
where you respect people, you respect the planet. And, if I could like wave a wand and change the way the food system worked, I would make it much more penal on the companies that are poisoning us.
Mm.
And I would tax and put fines on the companies that are knowingly using heavy pesticides, heavy chemical burden, stuff that they know are causing harm to humans, tons of artificial food dyes. I would put taxes on that, and I would take those taxes and subsidize
Mm.
the companies that are trying to do regenerative farming, that are trying to do organic, that are trying to clean up the food system and make it safer.
Mm.
Because you probably have seen on social media or Twitter or whatever, like there's been a lot of memes about like, what can we eat? Like,
Yeah.
it feels like everything's poison. Tap water's poison. There's microplastics in everything. There's
Yep.
forever chemicals in all your cookware. And I think some people feel like it's a conspiracy theory and it's like this really inconvenient truth,
Mm.
but it's not a conspiracy theory. I can tell you, I have spent 20 years in this area,
Yep.
and it is actually more corrupt and grosser than you realize.
Mm.
And in this country, like, almost everything is poisoned.
Mm.
And we have to, as a society, get together and say, enough, like,
Mm.
enough. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care if this company can make money. They should not be allowed to sell $3 cheeseburgers,
Yeah.
period. So that would be kind of my
Mm.
prediction and advice
I love
to
it.
people, which is please support your farmers who are doing a good job, support companies that you think are doing a good
Mm.
job, and stop giving money to the big food companies that are poisoning you.
Mm. Love it. Well, kind of bouncing off of that, as we wrap up the episode here, I'd like to conclude with if you can share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned, regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
Um, I got a lot, and I have a lot of mistakes I've made and
Yeah.
lessons I've learned. Um, I'll tell you one that's unusual that they
Mhm.
won't tell you very often. So I built Hue with my family, and HumanCo I created with my best friend. And there's generally advice: don't do business with your friends or with your family.
Yeah.
And I would say that if you have troubling or difficult relationships with your friends and your family, I agree. But if you have a good relationship and you have open lines of communication, there's nothing better than
Mm.
building businesses with your family and your friends.
Mm.
And it it obviously can go the wrong way if you're not open on lines of communication, or one of the people's super greedy. And I've seen families and friendships blow up over greed.
Yeah.
But with me and my best friend, who's now my business partner, and my family, we always were really, really open about lines of communication
Mm.
when things bother us, when things feel wrong or whatever. And it's magical,
Mm.
and so I would say if you do have good, transparent lines of communication, and you don't have like big egos where you can say, I'm sorry, and you can readily admit when you're wrong, I would say,
Mm.
doing business with your family and your friends is actually amazing.
Mm. Interesting. Love it. Well, Jason, thank you so much for taking the time. And to listeners out there, make sure to check out HumanCo at humanco.com.